Hello everyone and welcome to the Crowcast preview for another week. I'm your host Scorpus, and with me tonight on the cast is Phoenix. How's your week been, Phoenix?
Very good, thanks mate. And yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. It's good to come off two huge wins, and we are heading to the west for what should be another massive win for the Crows. Of course, we are facing Fremantle this week. It's on Sunday at 2:40 p.m. local time over in Perth, so that translates to 4:10 local time in Adelaide. So it's the twilight match, last match of the round. Being a Sunday match, we only have the squad of 25 available at the moment, and we have made one change at least for the moment. So coming into our squad, we have Thompson, McGovern, Kelly and Wigg coming in. Coming out, we have Seedsman with his butt cheek injury, and that leaves us with a bench of McKay, Ellis-Yolmen, Lyons, Wigg, McGovern, Matty Crouch and Kelly. So three of those guys will be coming out for this match. And I'll give it to you, Phoenix. Who do you think will be coming out?
Well, I can't see Jake Kelly playing. Tomo's the interesting one. I think he may come in, but I reckon we might see... I wouldn't mind betting that we see Richie Douglas come out for Harry Wigg.
Yeah, I think that's one of the potential changes. I also think McGovern is a strong chance to come back in as well. That could be for Richard Douglas, that could be for Ellis-Yolmen. The interesting thing is that both Thompson and Douglas are both named on the ground. So if we are taking players out purely from the bench, unfortunately, probably Ellis-Yolmen will be omitted along with Wigg and Kelly, leaving all those other guys to play. So just an interesting one. I'm not sure whether we'll debut a player this late into the season in Wigg, but I'd really like to see McGovern back in because he's heading over to his home state, and he's been playing pretty well before he was dropped.
Yeah, well, he was. I had a couple of quiet games and then came up quite nicely with Tex being out. Interesting, there's a few whispers around the place that Harry Wigg's been told he won't get a game this year, but he's definitely in the mix for next year. So I would imagine if not this game, then... you could probably say that's a fair call. Mitch McGovern probably has to come in. It'd be a shame to see Cam Ellis-Yolmen go out, though, and I think if they do omit Cam, I think it might actually indicate the club's longer-term plans with regards to him, because on balance and on form, if they're picking on form, he probably deserves to be there.
Yeah, I agree. I think he definitely deserves to be there for someone like Richard Douglas, who you've been mentioning on some of the other casts as well, that Douglas hasn't been in the best form, and if there was a senior player that was going to be replaced at the moment, it'd be all eyes on him. And Ellis-Yolmen, he was quite good last week, playing in a very, very similar role to Douglas. So if Ellis-Yolmen does become omitted this week, I think he could be up on the trade table, which is interesting. Would you trade him?
Oh, personally, I wouldn't. I think he's got a pretty unique set of skills and physical attributes that adds a point of difference in our midfield. But the word is that he's not overly liked by our midfield. Well, he's certainly not in favour with our midfield coach, and it is a bit of a logjam there, particularly if Scotty Thompson decides to go around again and the club facilitates that. So I'd keep him, but I wouldn't be surprised if we don't.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Thompson, because that's been a bit of a discussion point on the big footy boards this week, whether Scott Thompson will go around again next year. I'm firmly in the camp that he should retire. He's been looking below his best this year, and I think if he continues on for another season, he might slow down massively. But yeah, if we're going to keep Ellis-Yolmen, it'd be handy depth, even if he doesn't end up getting a whole ton of games for us, just to have that player that we know can come in and perform for us on the day, I guess.
If I was Ellis-Yolmen and being told I was being kept for depth, I'd probably look for other opportunities, because he's the first 22 in about half of the teams in the AFL, I'd imagine. Yeah,
I think it's unfortunate for him, if he's been told, he's only a depth player, that, I could see how he would definitely want to move on to another team, and, the Richmonds, Gold Coast, those sort of teams would probably be looking at someone like Ellis-Yolmen and the skills he provides. So, yeah, I mean, he's contracted for next year, so we'll have to wait and see for the trade period to see how that pans out.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the Fremantle team, of course, our opponent this week. They've made at least two changes coming into their squad. Subin, Mzungu, Sutcliffe, Tabiner and Blakely. Coming out, Ibbotson and Crozier. They've got a number of notable omissions. A number of their stars are injured at the moment. They've got Barlow, Bennell, Fife, Johnson, and Alex Pearce all out, and Zach Dawson is suspended. So that's 6 key players that would probably be playing this week for Fremantle, if not for injuries and other reasons. Of course, last match, we're playing Fremantle twice this year. So last match was round 16, 2016 at the Adelaide Oval. We beat Fremantle by 33 points in a pretty defensive struggle there. Betts ended up being our leading goal scorer, 4 goals for him. Sloane, 31 touches and 8 tackles. Lockie Neal, best on ground for Fremantle with 40 touches. And Michael Walters, a very decent haul, 3 goals, 2 in a losing side. Phoenix, will they present much of a struggle for us this week?
I think as long as we can get midfield dominance, which I would imagine we will, although, Sandilands, Mundy, Neal as a starting midfield isn't a bad lineup, and then you put Stephen Hill-Weller, who's been in good form, and Michael Walters across the middle there, and it's a decent set of players. But I think they're going to really struggle down back with our forward setups. They've lost a lot of experience down back, and I think they'll struggle there. And really up forward, Pav is only just going. Chris Main's just going. Ballantyne is only 1 game back in, I think, isn't he? So I would expect Taverner to line up in the forward line as well. He's not too bad, but I just don't think they have the firepower, to be honest with you. And they've showed that kicking fairly low scores over the last month or two.
I think this is another one of those games where we really do have the ascendancy in probably all parts of the ground, excluding the ruck division this week. You were mentioning the defence. I mean, they're going to play Silvani and Collins as their 2 key defenders, and which is, last time they played us, they had Alex Pearce, who did quite a good job on Taylor Walker. He kept him scoreless. I think he might have been a bit injured, Walker, but we'll still give the credits to Pearce there. And of course, Zach Dawson was also in the team and didn't do too badly on Josh Jenkins for probably the worst 150 game player in the history of the game. But anyway, but apart from those two, the 2 players, Silvani and Collins, I mean, they've got some okay medium defenders like Spur and those guys, but I mean, our forward line, we've got upwards of 6 or 7 players that can rotate through there who are of all different sizes and qualities and abilities, and they're going to present a big, big struggle for their defence. And up forward, I mean, I don't really see anyone, excluding perhaps Michael Walters, that would really could do damage to our defensive line, because I mean, they're even playing a guy, Michael Aptness. He kicked his first goal in AFL last week, but yeah, he's a very young key forward, and I don't think he's shown all that much either. So it's interesting for them. What about Michael Walters though, Phoenix? He tends to towel us up a little bit.
He does get off the chain. Ballantyne also can give us a little bit of trouble. But having said, the one I think would probably cause us the most concern up forward is Taverner. Walters, I'd expect him to actually get a little bit more time up the ground, simply because they don't have the numbers to have much of a midfield rotation unless he's part of it. But I'd expect someone to get a run with with Walters early on and just see how the game pans out, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see whether we'd stick with someone like Luke Brown on him for the entire game in that lockdown position or tagging role, or whether maybe we'd look towards an Atkins or even a Douglas or David McKay. Some of these players we tend to like to put on players when we need to do a cooling job. So, yeah, I'm not sure whether those guys will be too successful on Walters, because he seems to play quite above average against us, going against what he normally presents. But I think he's probably one of the key players that we have to shut down. The other one, of course, is Aaron Sandilands in the ruck division. No Jacobs this week, but I don't think Jacobs performs all that well up against Sandilands, and I honestly don't think we're losing too much by giving Riley O'Brien the test of his lifetime here in his second game.
No, I don't think so. Our midfield's shown that they can break even when we're not necessarily dominating the ruck division. So, and Sandy's only a couple of games back in, so I don't think he's going to hurt us too much around the ground. So as long as we can set up appropriately in the middle, I don't think it's going to be that big a concern. And a really good test for Riley O'Brien too. Second game in, and judging by his words during the week, he's up for the challenge. So it'll be good to see how he goes.
Yeah, I think he had the test last week against Brisbane with a fairly athletic ruckman. What's his name? I cannot for the life of me recall it at the moment. He was jumping all over O'Brien, but I think he was quite solid last week in his debut game. It's a very different ruckman for this week. Sandilands is much slower. Doesn't jump all that much, but his pure height and strength in the contest gives him the advantage for the Fremantle midfielders, and I think it'll be probably even a better sort of matchup, that type of ruckman for O'Brien's style. The way he plays is very, very similar to Sauce in the way he sort of doesn't jump all that much and tries to outbody the opponent and get the hit, and is quite effective around the ground. So this will be a big challenge. Of course, Sandilands will be partnered with Zach Clark. I don't rate Zach Clark at all. I think Fremantle should get rid of him. But he had 11 hit-outs on the weekend, so he was sharing the load quite a reasonable amount with Sandilands. So, interesting to see how that ruck division goes.
Yeah, you wouldn't think Sandilands is at full fitness. I reckon we might see a little bit more of Josh Jenkins than we usually do in ruck this week, just to try and break the matchups. I don't think we'll see Josh exclusively go up against Clark. I think you might see him up against Sandilands at times. And Jenkins is a bit of a jumper, so he wouldn't do too bad. He doesn't do too badly against those big monolith type ruckmen. So interesting to see how they play that.
Yeah, well, Jenkins wasn't too bad last week. I think playing that backup role, a bit more of a backup role than he'd normally play for us. And I know he's criticised a fair bit for not being able to do all that well in the ruck. But if worst comes to worst, I think he's not the worst ruckman to play, I guess.
Well, and being quite a quick player for his size, having him on the ball does give us a bit of a point of difference. I think that's probably where you'd like to see a little bit more improvement from Jenkins when he's on the ball, is actually to make his presence felt a little bit more around the ground. You tend to only see him at ruck contests. He doesn't seem to impose himself on the contests outside of that. So, interesting little match up there. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's going to have much bearing on the game.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, the one thing we saw last week, the last time we played Fremantle, was their interesting strategy, I think, kept us well behind our best for the first half of that match. We were barely leading by anything at half-time, and that was, of course, the strategy that Ross Lyon employed to flood everywhere, flood the centre, flood the back line, flood the contest, just chuck players, wherever the ball's going. Geelong also used a similar tactic against us, but their tactic was a bit more effective than Fremantle's. How are we going to go combating the flood against Fremantle this week?
Well, it'll be interesting to see whether he does revert to that, because over the last month or so, he has been trying to change their game style a little bit. So it will depend on whether he wants to stop the bleeding or whether he's happy to let him go and try and learn more about this new structure that apparently is a little bit more Hawthorn-like. Can't see it. But the pessimist in me and the realist in me says that he's going to flood. And it'll be a good test for us because it's the style of game that we struggle against the most. It's the teams that clog up our forward line and crowd up the contest that we tend to have the most problem with. We saw that against Geelong in particular, but there's been a few other games as well. So part of me actually hopes that he does, just so it gives us a little bit more practice, because we will have that, at least against Geelong come finals time.
Yeah, and I think over the past couple of weeks, I know we've been playing the two worst teams in the competition, but I've seen a little bit more of a return of our dynamic ball movement in those couple of matches, a bit more use of the handball rather than simply going for the long blind kick to a contest or into the forward line or whatever, and that's been reasonably effective, but it's hard to see, or hard to judge, I guess, how well those tactics have been working against teams that aren't putting up much of a fight. And even against Fremantle, if they do flood, they're still not going to be able to challenge us all that much, especially with their current midfield depth. They're probably playing, 4 or 5 younger or depth type players at the moment throughout their midfield, and whether they have, the tank or the ability or the knowledge of their game plan to structure up properly and do a real Geelong-like job is I don't think that's really going to happen, to be honest. But yeah, if we can return to our use from the back lines of shorter kicks and handballs, and if we can actually hit up some leading targets inside 50 or not just blaze away, then we'll be looking a lot better for the finals, I reckon.
Yeah, look, I agree. And there was, quite distinct contrast between the Essendon and Brisbane games regarding how we did move the ball. Essendon, we went handball happy, and at times it looked a little forced, and certainly resulted in overuse and a very high handball to kick ratio. Against Brisbane, we tended to use it by foot a little bit more. We were back to that 1 to 1 point something kick to handball, which we've been at all year and which you probably want. And we did take, I think it was 19 marks inside forward 50, so we were able to spot up targets. I don't think we'll have it that easily this time around against Fremantle, and it will be interesting to see whether whether we do go if we do go more by hand, because that would indicate to me that under pressure, which I think Fremantle will provide a little bit more than Brisbane, under pressure we fall back to a handball style, which is probably a weakness. So I'd like to see us continue to kick the ball and try to hit up targets.
Yeah, and I think we're at our most damaging stage when we are able to hit up the shorter targets. I know we've got a lot of lovely long kicks in our side, Atkins and Smith and those sort of players, but our ability to find those targets in the centre of the ground through short kicks and not simply resort to running handball chains, which is a favourite of my whipping boy David McKay, loves those running handball chains. But anyway, if we can get back to those short passes, I think that's when we'll be the best and most prepared for finals. But it's always good to have a plan B. If our kicking game plan isn't exactly going to plan, and it didn't go to plan against Geelong, we're going to need to roll out something else on the day. So if we can switch to a more handball-happy game plan, and if that's more effective for us, then we need to have the ability to do that. And against Essendon, we made a number of errors, I guess, in our sort of handball game plan, even some of our shorter kicks across that our half-back line. So if we can avoid those, and if we can really sharpen up there, then it'll go a long way to us being a more prepared final side, and that's exactly what we need to be targeting, because by all accounts, Phoenix, we will be finishing top 4.
Well, and this is a game that's going to really, have an impact on that as well. So we can't take the foot off the pedal. We've had party time the last couple of weeks. I don't think it'll be party time this weekend. I think Freo may have played their grand final last week against West Coast. They certainly threw everything at the contest, particularly in the first half. So it'll be interesting to see what their overall attitude to the game is. I would imagine that Ross would have them in learning mode, but they haven't rested anyone. They haven't, admitted anyone for management or early surgery or anything like that. So they're still playing their best side, and I think they'll give us a much sterner contest. And being over there, gives them a little bit further advantage and impetus. So it'll be a stern challenge. But I think at the end they just lack the firepower. They won't be able to kick a score against us.
Yeah, and one thing that we need to, of course, keep in mind is our percentage throughout the remainder of our games. We're currently sitting, of course, on 141.2% percentage-wise, sitting in third. Sydney's on 144.2%, GWS 140.2%, and Geelong 137.1%. Those are all the teams on the same amount of points at the moment, with 14 wins each. I was doing some maths earlier in the week just to figure out sort of what sort of percentage we need to be looking at in scores for this particular match. And if we come out with a scoreline of 100 points in our favour to, I think it was 70 points for Fremantle, we'll end up maintaining our percentage, roughly the same amount of scores. But if we can increase that in either direction, scoring more or alternatively keeping Fremantle to a lower score, then our percentage will increase. So I think it's actually looking quite good for us in the fact that we could be looking at a percentage booster here. It may not be for the same amount that we did against Brisbane, but if we're looking at a scoreline 120 to 70 or 60, which I think is achievable in this particular match, which would be a 50-point victory, we could be looking at almost 144%, and that would put us in contention for that top 2 spot.
Yeah, and I think that might be a bit of a focus of ours, is to keep Fremantle scoring down. We've already commented that they're a little bit light on, and I don't think we're going to have any trouble hitting the scoreboard. But if we can keep them to 10 goals or less, that's going to result in what you just said, a bit of a boost in percentage up around the 144 mark. And that all of a sudden, gives Sydney a bit of a shake. Obviously, Geelong are the ones that we need to watch over the next couple of weeks because they have quite a soft run home. So you'd expect, percentage-wise, it would be them that would be putting us under the most pressure. But if we can keep it up over the 140, 143, 144 mark into the final series, I reckon we end up top four and possibly even top 2 or 3.
Yeah, I mean, the one calculation that I also made was how we can beat Sydney's percentage, and the way to do that is simply to play the way Sydney did against Fremantle. If we end up scoring 130 points to 50, we will get a percentage of 144.9. So that is an 80-point win, so it's quite a challenge for us over in the West. But Sydney did manage to do that, and that will put us 0.7% above Sydney. So this is probably our last chance in the run home to get that real big percentage booster. But the one thing I worry about is that this is over in the West, and we've lost 9 out of 14 over there against Fremantle. They are one of the worst teams in the competition, but our record over there hasn't been great. The one thing, of course, going in our favour is that we managed to beat West Coast over there this season, and Fremantle are a much worse team. So do you reckon this will be a struggle for us, the Domain Stadium ground, or anything related to the home ground advantage for them?
Look, I think Domain has always represented a mental challenge for sides. It's a bit similar to Skilled Stadium down at Geelong. And having gotten over a significant hurdle by pulling West Coast apart earlier in the season, yes, they'll have more supporters there, obviously, but I don't think Domain actually will hold any fears for us at all. So I think it's almost out of the equation. It might give Freo a little bit of a boost, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's going to make much difference. And I actually think our team at the moment is playing Subiaco quite well.
Yeah, and Fremantle have had no trouble losing games at their home ground this year, so
no, that's right.
That's not going to be a factor for us, I agree. How about that final margin, Phoenix? How are you tipping this match?
Well, I think it'll be a 10-goal plus game. I would expect it to be a bit of an arm wrestle in the first half, but I would expect that our class and our superior firepower in the end will hold sway. Pardon me. So I'm thinking anywhere between 60 and 70 points this week.
Yeah, that'd be a really good victory for us, I think. I think there's a very, very strong chance that we'll be increasing our percentage like I was talking about earlier. So anything better than that 100 to 70 point margin, that 100 to 70 point, scoreline for us would be good. But I think it'll probably sit closer to the 50 or 60 point mark this week, which would be a handy little percentage boost for us. And especially if we can keep them to a really low score, somewhere below 50 would go a long way to helping us in that final race. I guess that brings us to the end of our little look at the Fremantle game. Let's keep going on to Game of Crows. So I managed to get on the leaderboard last week with my prediction that we kick more than 23 goals. Pretty safe one. We're almost wrapping up the end of Game of Crows here because Joel has currently still got a 7-point lead. We're keeping the game going because with 3 games left in the home and away season, there's still a chance for people to win. It's possible to win if you get the 3-pointers right. I'm going to go with a 3-pointer this week to try and even up the scoreline, but it's not looking good for me. I'm going to go Luke Brown, career-high handballs of 13. What about you, Phoenix?
Look, I'm going to go with the old standby. Jake Lever to kick his first AFL goal.
Yep, sounds like a good one.
Surely, Jake, come on.
Yeah, it's really about time for Jake. I mean, we've seen Hardigan kick one this year. We've seen Talia kick one. Luke Brown's kicked one. It's him versus Cheney at the moment. I think he could possibly take one out this week. Of course, don't forget to everyone else, if you want to keep joining in, enter through the usual channels. I've got some nice little plans for Game of Crows next year to spice up the game, make it a little bit easier to get into, but we'll talk about that next season. So keep that in mind, but we'll move on to the SNFL game. This is on Saturday. We're facing Norwood at 2:10 p.m, Coopers Stadium. And good news, this game will be live video streamed on the Adelaide Crows website. So for those people that want to take a look at what should be a very strong SNFL team for us this week, definitely check on afc.com.au for that. Of course, the reason why we're being stronger than usual is coming in Riley Knight, who has missed 15 weeks with his ankle injury. He'll be playing his first game in quite a while. Nathan Van Berlo is also returning, who will add that bit of experience that we need. Ricky Henderson also coming back in after a couple of weeks out with injury. Didn't make the AFL team this week, but will be playing SNFL. And Andy Otten back as well. So that's 4 big ins for us, Phoenix.
Yeah, a pretty strong side. You'd be a bit annoyed if you were Norwood with all those ends. Norwood aren't having a great season. Obviously, Adelaide currently sitting in the top 4 and looking pretty strong. Yeah, I'd expect a fairly big win actually this week. That's one of the better teams we've put on the park.
Yeah, especially if Ellis Yeoman goes back into an SNFL team, that will boost our midfield. And winning this game means that we will secure our first SNFL final spot, I believe, going on that mathematical calculations and everything. So I think we'll pull out a victory, and we'll see our guys in the reserves finals, which will be a lovely sight to see. And I think we could do some damage there as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, so there's a lot of other matches this week that are interesting and have finals implications. So we're going to crack through quite a number of them this week. We'll start probably with one of the least interesting ones, though. Western Bulldogs versus Collingwood, Etihad Stadium on Friday night. Travis Cloke has been dumped from the team. Ben Reid is out with an injury. Collingwood could push the Bulldogs, but Bulldogs have been looking solid.
Yeah, no, I can't see it, and surely that's time on Cloke's career, at least at Collingwood.
Yeah, you would think so.
Look, the 2-3 games out, if you're going to drop a guy like that, that's it. Collingwood lack firepower up forward. I mean, they've got Darcy Moore, but then, Jesse White to go along with him. No one else has really stood up to any great extent in that forward line, and I expect the Western Bulldogs will account for Collingwood quite comfortably.
Yep, and that means that the Western Bulldogs will equal our amount of games won. But of course, if we win on the weekend, we'll still be 1 game clear of the Bulldogs. So another match. This is the biggest one, in my opinion. Hawthorn versus North Melbourne at the MCG on Saturday afternoon. This is a really interesting match because if North Melbourne win, it will be a double whammy. Firstly, Hawthorn will drop down into 5th position. Their percentage of 120.7 will not be good enough, provided the other teams end up getting up this week. So that will be a big loss for them if that happens. And of course, North Melbourne will get another win under their belt, and that will secure their final spot, ending the potential runs of Port Adelaide and St Kilda, who are still mathematical chances. Other interesting things in this match, Ryan Burton, Hawthorn's first-round pick, and a pick that I think a lot of people on the Big Footy boards were thinking would go to Adelaide. He'll be making his debut this week, and big players back, Frawley, Puopolo, and Shields all coming into that Hawthorn side.
Well, this will tell us a lot about Hawthorn, I think. I think we know what North are, just a good, honest team. That's probably on their last legs. But Hawthorn getting beaten by Melbourne last week. I want to see how they come back. If they kick North off the park, which I expect they will, then we know that they've just been in cruise control for the last month or two, and they're just starting to fire up. And I don't believe in losses you have to have, but certainly last week would have given Hawthorn a kick up the arse. And a bit of firepower for Clarkson to get them up. So I expect Hawthorn to win quite comfortably this week.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think North Melbourne are by far the weakest team in the top 8 at the moment. They've been in pretty bad form. They've almost packed it up for the year, and I think they'll end up losing their first final. Hawthorn too strong. The interesting thing with Hawthorn is that their run home also sees them playing Collingwood and West Coast over in Perth. Dropping one of those matches is a chance, and it will do wonders for the rest of the teams in the top 8, but unfortunately at the moment it just looks like they will end up winning out the rest of the season, which is unfortunate because we don't want to see Hawthorn in the top 4 again, surely. GWS versus West Coast, Spotless Stadium, Saturday twilight match. This is an interesting one. Dylan Shield is back for GWS. West Coast known to be a bad travelling side, and I think GWS will probably win this one comfortably. But again, for us, if the West Coast do get up, that pretty much locks us in for top 4, you would think.
Yeah, very true. GWS had trouble putting Gold Coast away last week, but I don't rate West Coast that highly, and you're right, they're a terrible travelling team. If they can't travel well to Melbourne, God knows what they're going to do travelling to Western Sydney. So I'd expect GWS to get up quite comfortably on this one. Too much class.
Yeah, and the one thing with West Coast as well is that their final spot is essentially locked at the moment. So there's no real pressure coming from those sides out of the 8 to steal their spot, and they can pretty much cruise through and keep a very similar finishing position in that bottom part of the 8. So without that pressure there, I think GWS will account for them, unfortunately. Just fingers crossed it's not a significant percentage boost, because we're only sitting 1% ahead of them, so we don't want any big wins. The other match for finals is Richmond versus Geelong at the MCG on Sunday Arvo. Geelong's actually got two pretty significant outs in Andrew Mackie and Daniel Menzel not playing this week. Geelong is known to have pretty poor form against those mid-tier teams, Richmond being one of those, but I just think Richmond aren't good enough.
No, and they're going to miss Ben Griffiths. He's been okay the last couple of weeks. Look, again, it's about mindset. I think if Geelong are the real deal, they will count for Richmond quite comfortably. And on paper, the teams don't look evenly matched at all. So on form and on talent, I would expect Geelong to win comfortably. But you're right, they do seem to have these down games against mid to low tier teams. So if Richmond turn up and Geelong, who weren't overly impressive against Essendon, are not 100% on, it could be a close one.
The downside for us in this respect is that in some ways I think Richmond ended up playing their grand final last week when they defeated Collingwood. That match seemed to be quite in favour of Damien Hardwick in keeping his job for next season. I think he will retain that job next year, and there's a lot of emotion after the match with him ending up winning that game. So yeah, I think unfortunately they could be in cruise control mode for the rest of the season. But
I don't know about that, because there's a few blokes there playing for a career. There's going to be some big changes at Richmond over the off-season, you would think, and some of those would include some list squad changes. So I reckon there's a few there that would be still liking to finish off on a high. So I don't know whether they're quite in cruise control yet. They shouldn't be. They've disappointed their supporters all season. They should run out the season if they've got any self-respect.
And running out the season would be fantastic for us if they can take down Geelong over there, at the MCG as well. It's a not skilled stadium, so there's nothing to worry about there with the stadium advantage. Another big match, St Kilda versus Sydney at Etihad Stadium Saturday night. Paddy McCartan's returning to play for St Kilda, which is great to see after his concussion issues. If there's a danger match this week for any top 8 team, this could be it, because St Kilda's been in fantastic form at Etihad Stadium and they're really pushing for that top 8 spot, which they could get if they end up beating Sydney this week. And of course, again, for us, this will do wonders for us making a top 4 spot if Sydney ends up losing, because their percentage as well is quite high. It could open up that top 2 spot for us.
Well, I'm actually going to tip an upset on this one. I think the Saints might just sneak up on this one. Their midfield has been going quite well, which is obviously one of the Swans' strengths. The Saints love playing at Etihad. I just have a sneaking suspicion that we might see an upset here, which would be awesome for us. I actually expect Sydney to drop one game of their next 3, either this one or the one down in Hobart they've got to play in a couple of weeks or next week.
Next
so I
week.
wouldn't mind. Yeah, I wouldn't mind betting that they just have a little off the boil game this week.
Yep. It's very unlikely, statistically speaking, that every single team in the top 5 will win all their matches throughout the rest of the season. And I think, as you mentioned, Sydney is one of those teams that has some danger matches. This one being one of them, the one against West Coast next week being one of them. Hawthorn also has those danger matches facing West Coast. And just having a look at the rest of the fixture, I mean, GWS, they also have to play North Melbourne. So there are a number of danger matches for some of these teams. And
we've got Port, which is also, like, it doesn't matter what's happening. The showdown's always, tight or potentially tight.
Yeah, exactly. So with all these matches in mind, it's unlikely that all those teams will end up winning out to the end of the season. And if we can be the team that ends up winning all of our matches and one of the other teams being one that drops that match, we are a lock for top 4, which would be great. And of course, that's a lot of our focus for the rest of this season is trying to improve our position and get into that top 4. So there's one final match, though, I think that is worth mentioning. Port Adelaide versus Melbourne at Adelaide Oval on Saturday night. Interesting match here because Johnny Butcher has been dumped. It's almost certainly career over for him. Lobe coming back for the ruck department. Jesse Palmer making his debut for Port. And Jesse Hogan coming back in for Melbourne. How do you see this one going?
I do understand Port's selection policies here. I don't know why they would bring the ruckman back in at this late stage. He's been playing in the twos for a couple of weeks, hasn't he, I think?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, these two are both still mathematical chances, aren't they?
I don't think Melbourne is, but Port
maybe not
definitely is.
Melbourne. Yeah, maybe not Melbourne. Look, I'd expect Port to make show a good account of themselves, but on paper, I think Melbourne should win this.
Yep, I agree. I think Port Adelaide, while a lot of people are still keeping them in mathematical contention for whatever reason, they're just not that good. And we should smash them in the showdown next week. And if we don't, it'll be embarrassing for us. And Melbourne, they beat Hawthorn. They've been a much improved team this year. The only danger for them is, of course, they have to actually travel to Adelaide Oval to play this. But if Melbourne is serious, their midfield is so much better than Port Adelaide's. They're playing a whole bunch of spuds at the moment, Port in their centre. So Melbourne's class are out there. And their forward line doesn't go too badly either at the moment, especially with Jesse Hogan coming back in. So...
Well, they don't play too badly. I mean, they played a right against us at Adelaide Oval. The Patrick Dangerfield game, obviously, and I don't think Adelaide Oval holds any fears to them. And I think they'll get up. I mean, Port will have to play to their absolute best with the players they've got on the park to get up over Melbourne if Melbourne turn up.
Yeah, and just looking at some of their players, I mean, it's simply not going to happen, to be honest. Like when you're playing Tom Cleary, Logan Austin, Jarman Impey, Jesse Palmer, Carl Amon, Cam O'Shea, you're not going to win too many matches. So and next week, of course, there'll be a good preview for us because we should really take it to them.
Well, it's interesting, next week, just not jumping the gun too much, but showdowns are traditionally close, and I've just said it earlier myself, and yet we really should absolutely thump Port next. That should actually be, if it was any other team, you would be marking it down as a percentage boosting opportunity. So,
yep.
Yeah, it's one of those the weird things about the showdown, but look, if Melbourne don't win, I think they've lost the game rather than Port won it, to be honest, because they've certainly got more talent.
Yeah, and I mean, just looking at some of their, up against us next week, I mean, their squad's been reduced in its quality compared to when we played them last time, and we beat them by nearly 60 points. So I agree. If this was any other team, we'd be looking at a percentage boost, and that's really what it should be. And a lot of those guys, even to beat Melbourne, will have to play absolutely out of their skins to get close. Interesting, because I actually think, as far as Lobe coming back in, that almost makes their team worse in some ways.
Well, I mean, it gives them Jackson Trengove back in the centre half back slot, which they probably need given the way Melbourne line up and with their inexperience down back. But with Max Gawn's probably the All Australian ruckman this year, so Loeb's a bit of a lamb to a slaughter, I think.
Yep, I agree definitely in Maxi Gawn getting that All-Australian. He's been clearly the best ruckman of the year, but the All-Australian selectors, you never know what they're going to do. But
Nat Newey, maybe.
Oh my God, if they bring him in again. Anyway, that's a topic for later in the year when we get closer to those sort of things. And that brings us to the end of our little preview for this round. It is a bumper round, some really interesting games to watch if you're trying to follow the Crows' path into the top 4. Lots of upsets potential this week. Really good round in my opinion. Of course, don't forget to follow us on our social feeds, Twitter, BF Crowcast, as well as Facebook, BF Crowcast. We're on iTunes if you want to subscribe to us. Give us a review. That helps out with the rankings and everything like that.
A shout out to Tree Man and Interstate Crow who've dropped reviews on iTunes. So thanks very much for that, boys.
Yep, absolutely fantastic. Love to see more of those reviews. You can interact with us on Twitter and Facebook as well. We love getting those comments through. If you have any questions that you want to ask, do all that stuff on Twitter, or even the Spreaker comments on our Spreaker page. Crows Fan Central, that is now live as well. You will probably see some links and stuff to our articles popping up there. crowsfancentral.com if you want to check it out, but we've been tweeting out a couple of articles over the past couple of days, so yeah, it's another place to check out. And of course, Phoenix, you will be back on Sunday live 7 p.m. for the review cast. Actually, it might be a bit later this week, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's 4 o'clock our time or something like that. So, yeah, we'll have to play it by ear, but people are used to that on a Sunday afternoon. So anywhere between 7 and probably, 8:30, I guess. Keep an eye on the Big Footy boards if you're a member there, or else keep an eye on Twitter. We'll keep you up to date on Twitter as to what our starting time will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one thing quickly to mention as well, just for listeners listening right to this podcast, it seems almost certain at this stage that Brad Crouch will re-sign with the club this week, or actually today. Don Pike came out and said that it's looking very likely that, actually his direct quote is, we remain really confident that we can sign Brad really shortly. And I think that is complete code for he is signed with the Adelaide Crows on that reported 4-year, $2.2 million deal. So great news for us. And that ends out the Crowcast. I guess I'll see you next week, Phoenix.
Thank you very much, Scorpus. Have a good weekend.
Yep, and we're looking forward to another strong performance over in the West. See you guys later.
Very good.